Hello, everybody. I'm Kimberly Griffin. I am the publisher at the Mississippi Free Press, and I'm excited to be here with Cliff Johnston. I called you Johnston because I'm from Mississippi. Cliff Johnston, director of the MacArthur Justice Clinic at the University of Mississippi. Cliff, we are so glad to have you here, and I just want to let everyone know Donna will be joining us in just a second. But Cliff, we were talking before the broadcast and found out we know almost, I was like, how do I not know you? Know almost all the same people, have very similar trajectories. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up at the University of Mississippi.
Yeah, so it's great to be with you, Kimberly. I've watched some episodes, and I have to tell you, coming in after Casey Lehman is like being the fourth place finisher in the junior high talent show and coming on after Prince.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's no pressure. But my people, as we say in Mississippi, are from Tylertown. My mom and dad were high school sweethearts. My dad went to the University of Mississippi, not in the typical Sigma Nu frat boy way. He came from a hard scrabble farm, had to do ROTC to go to college. And then I moved around a little bit in the military because that's the path, dad took. And
Right.
Mississippi was always home base. So always, wherever we were, Mississippi was home. Summers, holidays, we were here. I lived in Jackson from the third grade to the seventh grade, and then moved to Huntsville, Alabama when dad got another job there. Came back to Mississippi College. Undergrad, went away to law school in New York, and then moved back here in 1992 when I finished, and been here ever since. So 29 years practicing law in Mississippi. And then, I often kid that I can't keep a job, but I worked at the United States Attorney's Office back in the Clinton administration, practiced private practice in Jackson on North Congress Street, across from Obama Elementary School, with
Next to two sisters.
next to two sisters, which was bad for my figure, with
Right.
former U.S. Attorney Brad Pygott and federal Judge Carlton Reeves and our friend Doug Miner. We had a law firm there for years and years. And then, we always did civil rights work. We always did voting rights work. We were involved in that. And then we had to do paying stuff to support our civil rights habits. And this opportunity arose at the MacArthur Justice Center at the University of Mississippi Law School to do civil rights law full time, which is the reason I went to law school. And I could teach, which I had done a little bit of. I lived in Sweden for a year, where I taught the history and law of the American Civil Rights Movement to European students, which was interesting. And I got the teaching
Wow.
bug, so I could practice civil rights law
Wow.
and teach law students in the same job. And it's the only job that would have pulled me away from what I was doing, because I left something I love to do something that I also love very much. And so I've been up here. I've been working 7 years at the MacArthur Justice Center. My wife and I live out in the country between Oxford and Water Valley, with a couple pigs and 20 chickens and some okra and squash and that sort of thing.
Wow.
And so it's been a good move, and it's been very interesting and challenging work, as you can imagine, doing civil rights and criminal justice reform in the state of Mississippi.
So I always like to ask people, hey, Donna's here.
Hey,
Donna, how are
Hey,
you?
Cliff.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Sorry about my tech issues.
I always like to ask people questions that we think everyone knows the answer to, because we say it all the time.
Yeah.
What does a civil rights lawyer do?
It's a great question. I mean, we always talk about, my civil rights have been offended, people's civil rights have been trampled upon. And it's not always clear what those rights are. Frankly, one of the problems we have is that it's not more well defined. But I think in the end, at the end of the day, what a civil rights lawyer does is challenge those powers and principalities that would trample upon those rights guaranteed to all of us in the law under the Constitution, vindicate those whose rights have been violated, and advocate for real structural change that creates a system that lives up to the ideals of who we say we are.
Right. And what are you all tasked with at the MacArthur Justice Clinic? What is that day-to-day like?
When I was thinking about taking this job, I talked to the leadership up in Chicago. MacArthur started at Northwestern University and decided they wanted a Southern presence. And when I started talking to them about what exactly our task is, there were two things they said. One, we are about criminal justice reform wherever you are. So looking at the criminal justice reform in Mississippi and doing those things that challenge the system and bring about necessary, needed change. And then the other thing they did, which was really attractive, is, they recognized that decision can't be made in Chicago. They wanted someone who'd been here a while, practiced law here, lived here, had a sense of the place. And when I said, do you have any ideas about what specifically you want me to do? And they're like, look, man, you're from Mississippi, you practice law in Mississippi, you lived there a long time. You go do what you think needs to be done. It's really an incredible opportunity, and it's an interesting gig. I mean, I'm paid by the state to sue the state, and that's not half bad. And frankly, I appreciate the fact that I'm given the latitude to do what I think's right. And so we've done a variety of interesting things. Ain't been easy, Mississippi, but we've been at it.
So it strikes me, and then I'm gonna turn. This is more commentary. I'm gonna turn it over to Donna. One of the things we always tell people is that we are Mississippians telling Mississippi stories. That it's important to have a Mississippi lawyer fighting for Mississippi people, because we understand Mississippi better than anyone else, and we're going to understand the unsaid. Like, you're going to walk into places, you're going to know something that other people don't know, that people are afraid to say. So I think that's really important, because a lot of times we talk about, I'm not a journalist, but the journalists talk about parachuting in lawyers, parachuting in journalists, and they come into a place like Mississippi. Cliff, you look like you wanted to say something.
I call it justice tourism.
Oh.
And there's plenty of it, and I got opinions about it. But anyway, go ahead. I'm with you, 100%.
Justice tourism.
It's like all the Baptist churches that go dig one well in Honduras, come back and never talk to those people again.
Yeah.
Oh, Cliff, I'm dropping that in every conversation for the next 10 days.
You can have that. Yeah.
All right, I will turn it over to Donna. I know she has some things she wants to ask you.
Sure.
Yeah, I have to comment on the justice tourism one for a second too, because it's funny, is if there's anything I think Southerners can agree on and Mississippians can agree on, it's the annoyance of some of that sometimes, even if we don't agree on anything else. And particularly the type, I don't mean people come in to do great work. I mean, we all work with those folks, journalists, lawyers, and it's been a strong tradition. I mean, look at the civil rights movement, right? So we don't want to come across wrong on that, but I think that kind of the things that we're talking about as much as anything are people parachuting in, to like you say, kind of take in our problems, but not necessarily taking those lessons back home with them. So I'm just curious what you would say to that, Cliff.
Yeah, I mean, a few things. One is we have benefited from so many bright, wonderful people who've come here and thought they were just going to stay a year or two. And then this place has a power, right? If you appreciate complexity and you start doing that work in Mississippi, sometimes you think you're going to stay 2 years and you look up and you've been here 20, and man, have we benefited from those people. And the three of us will stipulate the fact we love them and we appreciate it.
That's right.
The problem arises, right? Like, I think about the Mississippi Delta, the number of groups over the years that have come in and dropped down in places like Indianola and Clarksdale and Greenville and Chula and promised these long-term, commitments and initiatives, only to, in 2 or 3 years, when they recognize what an uphill battle it is, or gets too hard, the funding runs out, and they disappear. And that doesn't help us. And it reminds us that as much as we appreciate outside funding, and we rely on it, we're dependent on it for sure. And much as we appreciate the talent of people outside the state, for those of us who are here for the long haul, who are invested in this place, we're going to have to stay the course while other people come and go. And we're going to have to walk alongside affected communities in a thoughtful way, so that when those other groups kind of come in and come out, they see that we're still there. It's complicated. Yeah.
Well, I have two thoughts on that. One is that's exactly how we're trying to approach our journalism at the Mississippi Free Press now. Because the same way I've learned that lesson kind of over the years, and I'm less interested at this point and Kimberly's with me on this. It's like we're less interested in people wanting to kind of come do the Mississippi thing, maybe win some awards or whatever, and then kind of move on quickly. What we really need, and I think I hear it in what you're saying, is we need institutional knowledge. We need people who really kind of dig in here for the long haul. And that's kind of the approach. And I've learned that lesson the hard way a few times, as we all have, right? And then the other thing you said I want to comment on there is that you're talking about the Delta and how the Delta gets so much attention. Now, the Delta deserves attention and long-term attention. But like I just came back from a reporting trip in Noxubee County. Noxubee County didn't get too much attention. And Noxubee County, as I have really learned, more so than I ever knew, because Noxubee County, and that's close to where I grew up, but I didn't know nearly what I needed to know about poverty and other issues in Noxubee County. And I was traveling there with a reporter who's from Noxubee County, a Mississippian, right, who grew up there. And she keeps saying, it's like we have a lot of the same problems as the Delta. It's just that people aren't paying attention, And so what we might say here is that the justice tourism isn't in Noxubee County.
Yeah, that's right. Right. There's certain places that are sexy, right? You go back to your funders, you talk about the fact that you did this work in Clarksdale at the Crossroads, or you did it, in places that people know about. And then you look at this poorest state in the country and the needs in so many places that people have never heard of and aren't known to funders. And, you saw it in Noxubee County. And, so much of where my brain is right now, I've told people lately, when I took this job, I've spent so much time thinking about race and racism and structural impediments to participation in just justice system and economic advancement and economic development and education. And, since I've taken this job, we have really lived at the intersection of poverty and criminal justice, which grabs some of these issues of race, not all of them, right? It just it doesn't. But it is it's pretty incredible what when I talk about churches going to Honduras. When you look at the numbers on the economics in Mississippi, you look at the number of 30% of children grow up in poverty. 30%, right? We're the poorest state in the country, and it's interesting in the work that we do how much those issues that person was talking to you about in Noxubee County, how much poverty impacts outcomes in criminal justice, how many times poor people come out worse just because they're poor. And, I grew up in the church. And so this interesting irony of the fact that happens in the most religious state in America, right? Where, as I often say when I'm out speaking to sometimes faith communities, like, I ain't here to talk to you about the 6 or 7 verses in the Greek and Hebrew texts that arguably talk about homosexuality. I'm happy to talk about that and what they say. I ain't here to talk about that. I ain't here to talk about abortion. I'm not here to talk about capital punishment. Let's talk about the issue that's addressed in 2,800 plus verses in the Greek and Hebrew text. And that's our special obligations to the poor.
Right.
Right. There's no arguing that. So I'm interested in, because of whence I come, these interesting criminal justice issues that arise in the most religious state in America, the blackest state in America, from issues of poverty.
I think I've been thinking a lot about this because I always think about why people fall for the ilky doke when it hurts them, right? But I think poor people specifically have bought into whatever the wealthiest among us have told them, and that it is their fault that they are poor, it's particularly in churches, that they haven't done enough, they haven't prayed hard enough, they didn't believe hard enough. There's something they haven't, there's something that's their fault. Not that they start, our producer always talks about he started on second base, not that they started in the dugout.
Right.
Forget on a base,
Right.
On
the road outside the park.
Right. So there's this idea that, and so people who still subscribe to that, even if it's to their detriment, have bought into a pattern of belief that it's their fault that this thing has happened to them. So if it's my fault, it also must be that other guy's fault. So it's all our faults, and we've just got to do better about whatever the better is. Try harder.
I think it shows the real danger of this prosperity gospel. The notion that, God blesses us with riches if we are faithful, right? I understand. I don't want to be dismissive of people's, firmly held beliefs, but the flip side of that is exactly what you're saying. So if you're not successful, as we define that, if you don't have money, it must be that you have not been faithful and you have not had the proper values and ethics and morals, and you make bad decisions. And I'm fascinated by our feelings about the poor. I often say that I believe that in this, the most religious state in America, we hate poor people.
Well,
I think we have contempt. It's not benign neglect. I don't think it's benign neglect. I think we hate poor people.
I think we have contempt. Now, I have a different thought about prosperity gospel. I'm not as irritated by it, although I can be, because I think for so long, a lot of the Black church, not all the Black church, a lot of the Baptist, Pentecostal, if you see our hymns, we'll get it by and by. You'll get you won't, your reward will be in heaven. So the idea of allowing people a mind shift, well, it's okay to have some stuff now. It's not a bad, so I go back and forth about that, because that it's that drummed into you. I didn't necessarily grow up in this tradition, but I had friends that did. My church believed in stuff. They liked stuff, and they didn't think it was a sin to have stuff.
Yeah.
But they were prosperity gospel, but it was like, get a Cadillac, whatever. It's fine. But there's this idea that you will toil here and you will be broke and broken down and sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that you will get your reward later on. I think that also held people hostage, because that's also some saintliness in that toiling. And I tell all my friends right now, like I have friends who will say, "Oh, I think I charge too much," and I was like, "We need for more good people to have more money, so charge what you're worth, and then donate it to somebody. If you don't want it, you don't have to keep the money." But that's just my thought about some of that.
Yeah. And I'm looking at it from the perspective. One of the things that I've become more and more aware of as I hang out in this space is when I talk to my students about issues of, bail reform and debtors' prisons and lack of access to counsel. One of the things I realize that a lot of my students don't understand is if you've not been poor and up against it, talking about poverty is a very interesting and difficult thing. Right. Like I have students who don't understand when we start talking about the fact that somebody doesn't have $50 a month to pay toward fines or to satisfy an obligation or to satisfy the court. Right. And you start trying to talk to them about $50 a month matters, man. The number of people in Mississippi who don't have $50 at the end of the month, is not insignificant. But a lot of us don't have that perspective. And so I think, Kimberly, one of the things important, I start talking about prosperity gospel and what I think about it, and I'm talking about it from the perspective of a, 54-year-old straight white male who's never been really poor. other than like student struggles and temporary
Right.
things. So I think part of that, when we start thinking about what we think about the poor and how we talk about poverty, certainly is a matter of perspective. And
Right.
and you can
Right.
be around it, and then you can be in it. And
Right.
and I appreciate your point. Thank you for that.
Well, and I'm glad you said it too, Kimberly, because I was gonna ask you, like, I'm kind of listening to both of you, and I was kind of from a different place, probably slightly, which was more growing up poor in white churches, country churches, where
are you from, Donna?
Neshoba County.
Oh, ooh.
yeah, like the real thing there, right? But what am I trying to say? So, and here, but hearing this, just this disdain for even among poor whites or poor-ish whites, depending on who they were. Not everybody rolled up nickels to buy an Easter basket like we did, but there weren't that many super wealthy people around me when I used to go to the Southern Baptist Church. But there was so much, certainly, disdain for Black poor. I mean, it was just all up in racism.
Right.
And it was, they are not working hard enough. They are not doing this. They are not doing that. Meantime, there were plenty of people in my own family who were bums or whatever. I mean, who were, and maybe that's a horrible thing to say, but it's true, who were on welfare and all these other things and not even trying. So it's almost like, I think this is a really interesting conversation about the church from different perspectives, because, I'm not even sure I ever heard the phrase prosperity gospel until listening to you guys talk about it. But just thinking about how I would call it just contempt gospel for
it's simplistic. It's simplistic.
Yeah.
And I think because I run into so many good, mostly white people who are afraid of having real wealth because that is evil. And who benefits from that? Once again, if you don't want to keep the money, you can give the Mississippi Free Press the money. We'll take the money. But right, take the money. You're like, go take the money. But there's why do you believe that, and why do you have that contempt?
The interesting about this is a criminal justice conversation. The thing, I mean, so it is hard to exaggerate how important money is if you're in the criminal justice system. And it is absolutely the case that your outcome is radically different in the system if you're poor. And the reality in Mississippi is the vast majority of people in the criminal justice system are poor, right? So our system pummels people who don't have access to resources and money in a number of ways. And I do this thing when I speak to faith communities. I'll do this. So Donna and Kimberly, you can imagine how this goes. I'll go in, and we'll start talking about, I'll say, how many of you agree that we, as people of faith, have a special obligation to the poor? Right? You would, everybody? Yeah, sure. Great. And and they've read my resume, so they clearly know I'm a liberal dude, right? So I'm like, and they're like, uh-oh, I'm agreeing with this guy. I'm like, okay, how about this? How many of you agree that because we as people of faith have a special obligation to the poor, that we should stand up against any policy or practice that punishes people solely because they're poor? How many of you agree with that? Sure. Okay, this ought to make you nervous. We're pretty far down the road together. How many of you believe that because we as people of faith have a special obligation to the poor, we should stand up against any policy or practice that punishes people just because they're poor, will join me in challenging a money bail system that results in thousands of Mississippians sitting in jail for 2 or 3 years before their trial when people with money go home? How many of you want to raise your hand on that? Crickets. I say, what just happened? Well, you just got political. Oh, indeed I did. Indeed I did. How many of you will join me? You've expressed your commitment to this notion. And there's something that happens where people check up, right? They check short. where this notion of folks aren't going to do right, these folks are sorry, trifling, whatever you want to say about them, you know, the attitudes we've been raised with about poor people, the things you talked about, Donna, hearing in the church about poor Black folks, those folks who also were raised in those churches are now sitting on the bench, right? Those are our judges who are thinking about collecting fines and fees for the local county municipality, and that bases its budget on, you know, collecting all those misdemeanor traffic tickets and loitering charges and all the millions and millions of dollars, the transfer of wealth from local people into the coffers of local municipalities. And their attitude about people who can't pay, don't pay, is troubling. And I've had conversations with a lot of, it's contempt. And it's contempt, and it's this notion of, so what you're telling me, Cliff, when you tell me that I have to put these people on a payment plan or give them community service, is that poor people just don't have to comply with the law. They can do whatever they want to do. And there's a contortion in the face, and there's an anger around it. It's frustration. And I think, you know, it's been troubling when we've observed what happens in courts. The number of people who get locked up because they can't pay a fine or a fee. You know, we sued the city of Jackson over their pay or stay policies. We sued Moss Point. We sued Corinth. And we go into court after court where people every day are being thrown in jail because they can't pay misdemeanor tickets and they can't pay driving without a license tickets. I mean, you know, and you know, they say you owe us $1,000. They might as well tell them they owe them $10 million. And there's a lack of any compassion on the part of way too many of our judges. I'm disappointed in what I see on the bench.
Well, and you talk about that, and it's like it's not even yes, it's a lack of compassion, it's contempt, but it's also this not thinking about how one thing connects to another, because systemically or structurally or anything else. Because if you can't afford to go to work for whatever reason, because, you know, it's like one thing affects something else. And so it just becomes this chain of things that happens to people because of what's going on. Or they're sitting in, I mean, nothing makes me madder than pretrial detention for years. I mean, I don't even think most people in our state, they either really don't care or they don't understand what we're talking about. They don't understand the difference between jail and prison. You know, that people are detained in a jail without a trial because they're accused of something, and then they're having to pay this money, right? I mean, you can explain this better than me, but it's like this idea of people need to just think straight on about this. And then the effects, that's what I'm trying to say, the systemic effects of all that. If that's a parent, or, you know, they're sitting in jail, they're not taking care of their kid, being able to take care of their kids, they're not being able to work or get another job or whatever the case might be. It's just this vicious cycle.
Oh, Donna, look, I mean, think about bail practices in Mississippi, right? So when you're charged with a crime, thank goodness you're presumed innocent. And as a result of that presumption of innocence, which we say we believe in, we proclaim that, of course, the presumption is you're not going to be locked up before your trial. Why would you be locked up before your trial? You haven't been convicted. You're innocent. Yeah. And I'll talk to justice court judges and municipal court judges in Mississippi who set bail, and I'll tell them all the time. I'll speak to the entire, you know, conference room full of them at their convention and say, no person who's ever appeared before you for their initial appearance when you set bond, not a single person is guilty. You've never dealt with a guilty person. And that their minds explode, right? And so we either believe in this presumption of innocence or we don't. So what the law says, and what the Mississippi Rules of Criminal Procedure recently adopted for the first time in 2017 unanimously by a very conservative Mississippi Supreme Court, says the presumption is release without paying a dollar. The only situation in which you should have to pay for your liberty is, the law says, is if you're deemed to be a flight risk based on a evidentiary finding, or a danger to the community. So we started gathering data about how many thousands of people, and there it is. So if you go to msjaildata.com, we started gathering data about how many thousands of people spend months and years in jail in this state of Mississippi, where we have no time limit on how long you can be incarcerated post-arrest and pre-indictment. So if a grand jury only meets once every 6 months in this locality, and the officer in your case is going to Gatlinburg or Branson or Disney World, and they just bump you over to the next grand jury, no big deal, we'll just bump them over. 6 more months in jail because a judge set bail. And 99.5% of cases in Mississippi, municipal court judges and justice court judges are imposing money bail on people charged with crime in every case. And people with money pay it, and they go home. I'm out. See you guys in 2 years. Whenever my trial comes up, I don't know how long it'll be. It's going to be a long time. It takes forever. The thousands of people who don't have money, they sit in jail. They sit in county jails for a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years until their case comes to trial. In this state, right, that's one of only 6 states in America without a statewide public defender system, where there's only 6 counties in the state that have full-time public defenders offices. In 76 counties, you have public defenders who do slip and falls at the Piggly Wiggly and Walmart truck crashes and wills and divorces. And some of them are excellent, some of them less so. They're busy. They got a lot on them. And you sit in there, and maybe nobody ever talks to you. You don't know why you're there. You don't know how to get out. And judges feel tremendous amount of pressure to impose those bail amounts, because if you don't impose bail and people get out, you're having this conversation in Jackson right now. Right now, about these folks got out, they've been charged with a crime, and we got to keep these people locked up. So this system, you think about what it does if you're poor, and the unfairness of a system where people charged with the exact same crime in the exact same court. One person goes home and another person spends 2 or 3 years locked up with no access to, advocacy, and nobody there to fight for them in most of the cases, simply because they're born into poverty or they live in poverty. That ought to keep people awake at night. That people ought not be able to sleep.
Right. Let me rave for a second, Kimberly, and then I'm going to give it back to you. And 2 things there. One is that, and you talk about the debate in Jackson, these crazy disinformation blogs and all of these things who go crazy because somebody got bond, and got out, or when somebody actually commits a crime later because of that. I mean, I get it, but I get somebody came back and they committed a crime and maybe they were out on bond, but they don't understand. They haven't been convicted. What you ought to be yelping about is at least is faster trials, instead of this kind of poor people being left in these cycles in jail. And then my other rave point, and then I'm going to shut up for a while, is that so many, we're like here in Jackson, so many of the people who are sitting in the Hinds County Detention Center for years, sometimes before trial, as you know, are young Black men who are already in very difficult circumstances. I've talked to a lot of these guys, and I'm about to run a piece soon by a young man in this circumstance. And if you understand anything about the causes of violence and worse crime, that sitting there in those jails, not convicted of anything, with the conditions, and not even during COVID, which had to be even, horrifying, but that is increasing the chances that they're going to come out of there and do something else to get in trouble, if they do get out eventually. And so you hear these cases where a young man got out of jail finally for whatever reason, and then comes out and commits violence or something. And they had said in pretrial, we had a story about something like that recently. So it's just all so short-sighted. So that's my rave.
And then what you're doing is so you've got a key member of a family pulled out of that family, which means you're down one income, an income that may have been keeping the rest of the family afloat. And so that whatever the legal word is, pre-trial
detention. Yeah,
pre-trial detention. It just if a family's here, just drops them, they just keep dropping because they've lost a caregiver, they've lost somebody who was contributing something to the household, whether it was money, whether it was time, whether it was energy, whether it was labor. They've lost a person and so it pulls the rest of the family down.
Yeah.
And everybody's trying to dig out because they lost a key player who was contributing in some way. And so these families just can't ever get out of the cycle of poverty.
And we're so addicted to locking people up. We've become so convinced that must be the response to undesirable behavior, that we just keep doing these things that we know don't work. I mean, we agree that we're in this cycle that you described so well, Kimberly, but in this state with the second highest incarceration rate in the world, only behind the crazy folks in Louisiana. Again, the most religious state in America has the second highest incarceration rate. Let's keep all these issues, let's keep this in mind. And we're addicted to locking people up. We just can't, we have no creativity. We have no capacity to think about, any other way to respond to behavior we don't like. And, when you look at the goals of incarceration, the only ones we seem to be satisfying are, retribution and incapacitation. We just warehouse people. Donna, to your point, one other thing to add, just another layer, is so many of those folks I see in the Hinds County Detention Center and other places are really significant number struggling with profound mental health issues. Mm-hmm. So we've moved our mental health warehousing to sheriff's responsibilities in county jails. I've sued. I'm taking depositions actively in a case, a jail suicide case, where the sheriff admitted afterwards, like, I don't know how to deal with these folks. I'm not trained in this. And these folks are here for years, and they're going to hurt themselves, or they're going to hurt somebody else, or one of my sheriff's deputies, and we're not equipped to handle this. But we've shut down community-based mental health services, and we've pushed people into the criminal justice system. So another tragedy that you see when you go visit those folks in Hinds County and other counties across the state is a significant number of those young men needed intervention in a mental health facility at the local level at years prior. And they're medicating with substances, trying to shut out the things that torture them on a daily basis.
And look, they will tell you, that's the thing. It's like this young man that I'm talking about who's working on something for us. I mean, I met him because several years back, I did a piece about these young men in the Washington edition. And young people, they know when they need help in many cases. They know they're caught in cycles. And I learned this from the Youth Media Project too, working with young people who had been in trouble or were in these circumstances. But very few people listen, and there's not this kind of net. And then instead they end up in the system like you're talking about, without any kind of services, without people trained to help them. Or they go to prison, like this young man actually ended up in prison. And what's going to happen with reentry? I mean, what's going to happen when he comes out? And I'd love to hear more from you on that, because we talk a lot about reentry right now, but a lot of the problems come from reoffending. But talk about that. What could we do in that case?
Yeah, it's such a big issue. And the Mississippi statute on what happens when you're released from prison, there's a schedule. Like if you've served up to 5 years, you get $25. And if you've served 10 years or more, you get $100, civilian clothes, and a bus ticket to the county of conviction or the nearest state line. That's our release statute in Mississippi. So what I think everyone now realizes, and I've had conversations with very aggressive prosecutors, lots of sheriffs, law enforcement folks, is that when people come out of the system, whether they're on supervised release or they've flat timed, they've gotten paroled, they come back to the community, right? Because we've incarcerated them, even on misdemeanor charges. You send somebody away for 20 days. The research shows after 3 days of incarceration, you lose your house, you lose your job, and that you have no longer able to pay child support. This parade of horribles begins after 3 days. So now you come out after 3 years or 30 years, and you don't have housing, you don't have a driver's license, you don't have a state ID, you don't have any skills, and we expect you, having been rehabilitated, to stay within the bounds of the law and to make your own way. For those precious few who have a structure, a family structure in place, or a group of friends who can support them, there's a fighting chance. But for the many folks who've lost those relationships over time, or who never had them to begin with, it's silly. It's silly for us to think that those people are going to come out and be successful. And so now I'm having these conversations across the political spectrum with people who say they've been clamoring to the legislature, the people we elect, to take this seriously, to fund transitional housing, job training programs, mental health services, healthcare services, and talk to prosecutors. Talk to prosecutors about the frequent flyers they see time and again, and they'll wax eloquent for you about the fact that they know that folks are coming back because they know the situation into which they're released. And I think that we really have to hold our political leaders accountable for the failure to recognize this very obvious point and to invest in it. If all we're going to do is build prisons in the middle of nowhere so nobody has to think about it, and warehouse a bunch of folks, get them out of sight, out of mind, and put them in a system that does nothing to give them a chance for success on the back end, then I don't want to hear about recidivism. I want to hear about the fact that that crime's increasing and our system's broken and the world's a dangerous place. It's your damn fault.
That's true, and it's just true. Yep.
Yeah, and so church people, politically interested people, folks who are interested in public policy, local leaders, mayors, boards of supervisors, all of us can join forces, and I'm talking Republicans, Democrats, old, young, right, in expressing our expectation to political leaders and legislators that you're going to fund meaningful, robust reentry programs that give these people we say we want to rehabilitate a fighting chance at success. Otherwise, we're doomed. We're just gonna. It's just hopeless and silly. And the question I ask my students, and I tell them it's not rhetorical. I ask them all the time, who gives a shit? No, like literally, like tell me, say it. Who are the people who care? Because I'm afraid there's not a single political leader in Mississippi who's ever lost a vote for being too tough on crime.
Yeah.
Right. A single political leader in Mississippi who's ever lost a vote for inhumane prison conditions. Like, what's the pressure on them? Why wouldn't they? What price do you pay for not doing the things that we say are so important? Where's the pressure?
And I don't think you can put too fine a point on how hard it is to re-enter, even with every resource you can possibly have. Before the pandemic, my church did some re-entry. I didn't do it, but I was adjacent to it. And it would take two people with master's degrees, a lifetime social worker, to get an ID for one person, because they were born in Louisiana, but their parents didn't file for their Social Security till they moved to Mississippi, and then they moved to Arkansas. And they weren't it was like, and it was no different than a lot of people, back when we were born, you didn't have to get your Social Security card, I think, till first grade or something, whatever.
And where's the birth certificate? I can't find the birth certificate. I don't know what birth certificate is.
Right. I don't even know where county was that filed in. I think I was born in Arkansas. I mean, no different conversations. Like, some of us think we were born in one county and then we go and we weren't born in that county.
Our parents lived there, but you were born one county over where the hospital was. Yeah, I mean, whatever.
Right.
I mean,
it is so complicated with the best of resources to re-enter with every good thing happening to you. And it just seems okay, it seems okay for our fellow human to be sort of cast aside, even though we say we love them. Well, I guess we don't actually say that.
well, I mean, here's the thing. Tonight, there are 300 plus people in Mississippi prisons who've already been paroled, and they would be released. They would be released tonight.
Wow.
They'd be released tonight if they had housing.
Wow.
All they need is an address. There are 300 plus people tonight who will spend the night.
So you can't be released if you don't have an address. You have to have an address.
The policy of the state of Mississippi is you will not be released to homelessness. So we make you homeless when we lock you up. And then when you earn parole, because you did all the things they've told you to do,
wow,
we won't release you because you don't have a house to move to.
Wow.
And we don't require the state to maintain an adequate number of transitional beds. And specifically, because of our sex offender laws, and the definition of sex offender has become extremely expansive, right? We're not just talking about pedophiles and, but sex offenders, because they can't live within a certain number of feet of a playground and a church and a school. There's only you got to live out in the middle of a pasture, right? Where do you put those folks who've served their time, paid their price, whatever you think about them? We've said their debt is X and they've paid X. And now they can't come out, right? I mean, and then there's so many other people who committed other crimes who have no place to go, no support. And Kimberly, we've done some work on some exonerated people. We've paid thousands of dollars out of our budget to social workers to help take care of those folks. So it's an investment, but they're doing great. When you give them that opportunity, they can be successful. But if you don't give it to them, it's a problem. And where I'm hopeful, I'll tell you where I'm hopeful is I think DAs, sheriffs, police chiefs, other people who are not the usual suspects are now willing to walk alongside us in making these demands. And I think this legislative session of 2022, I think keep your eyes open.
So let's talk a little bit about states that are doing it right. Kind of, if you had to wave a magic wand, tell us about some states that didn't start out great, but have had some reforms in the past couple years that seem to be really working.
Yeah, I don't know. I have these conversations with people all over the country. This is not a problem unique to Mississippi, right? I mean, I suspect there are success stories out there, and there certainly are people who are doing more than we are. But as far as giving you the examples of this is where, we want to hold this up as the example, I can't give it to you. Certainly you're seeing, this progressive prosecutors, all of a sudden that term comes around. Y'all talk to my friend Scott Cologne, right? I mean, he's an inspiring guy. He's a serious person, working as a prosecutor, but thinking about how do I do this right? My friend Jody Owens, I think, wants to do the right things. So you're seeing places, up in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, you've seen places where there's a lot of different thinking about how we prosecute, how we do things. But I think across the country, right, this mass incarceration that began in the early 80s, right, for long, broad reasons, it's a long conversation. We're recognizing that, and look, both sides of the aisle are responsible for it. Our friends Bill and Hillary were 100% on board with 3 strikes and mandatory minimums, and talk about super predators and all that. But we've realized this notion of just locking everybody up is not good policy. And you know, look, so I think it's a time for people to be creative and talk about different ways we might do it. And so this defunding the police conversation, abolition movement, things that sound really radical, you dig a little deeper. I think
That's
they're just people trying to be creative and think about, man, it's another way that people who are acting in a way that we don't prefer or that we condemn, are there things we could have done differently earlier or somewhere else along the chronology that would have prevented that would make people safer, would have given this person a chance. And I just think every time somebody offers up something different than what we know, it feels radical and it feels scary and it feels, you know, impossible. And I think we just need to be ready.
Well, and you know, we also need to say here that if you can't come on board because of the humanity of it, which, you know, you should be able to do, you need to do some homework about the cost of the kinds of money that can be saved to the taxpayer. And a lot of that money, you know, and this is a whole conversation we don't have time to have this time, but a lot of it goes to private prisons, you know, a lot right here in this state. But you know, it's being proactive just always saves money, you know, and saves resources. And so it's this idea of, if, you know, and it's part of the reason I believe that a lot of conservatives are coming together with progressives. A lot of that has to do with the cost, not all of it, you know, but that's legitimate. And so it's like, if one of your concerns is the cost to society, then you actually need to be willing to pay attention to what a lot of people are saying about the cost to society. That if you're, you know, how much it costs to keep people incarcerated over and over and over again. Now, yeah, the private prisons give a lot of campaign donations to some politicians. So you're going to you need to know that, you know, so that you can get past that thinking out there. But, you know, it's cost.
And look, I think I'm not blowing smoke at you guys. I'm very serious about this, and I've said it in other contexts. I think it's why the work you guys are doing in MFP is so important, right? So this piece of to help us think about in the work that you're doing, help us think about in practical terms, like, what are the implications of not doing the things we're talking about? What are the costs of not doing it? So there are some people who you have them at human rights, it's civil rights, right? You got them, right? You had me at that ain't right.
Yeah.
Right. But then there's other people who are like, you know, you don't do the crime if you can't do the time. Beretta fans. I'm that old. Yeah. So, you know, people who are just like, you know, I'm sorry, but there has to be consequences, and, you know, and then you start talking about, that's fine. I hear you. Let's talk about the practical implications from a financial perspective. And if these people are circling back around and we're paying thousands and thousands of dollars again, you know, maybe we can be better stewards of taxpayer money and keep our constituents safer if we do another thing. And I think a lot of the work y'all are doing is holding a mirror up to this system and showing what the practical implications are of doing the same thing we've always done, and not thinking creatively and being open to a situation where maybe we don't put that person in prison this time. That didn't work.
Right.
Just do this other thing.
Well, and thank you for saying that. And we plan to do a whole lot more in this arena as we go forward, as you could probably guess, because this is. But one of the reasons I'm so interested in criminal justice issues, and I know this is true for Kimberly too, is it's what you say. It's not just about the criminal justice system. It's about all of it. You know, it's about the connections between poverty and criminal justice and cost to society. It's safety. Like, I don't want it. And I preach a lot about, you got to care on the front end. I know it's really trendy now to talk about reentry, which is good. I'm not taking away from that. But I also really push this idea of violence prevention among young people, because if you can not do the things that happens that gets them into the system in the first place and causes that system to kick off in that pattern, then not only do you help that young person, you keep people alive, you keep you stop the virus of violence, and you save money over time. So, I mean, it's all really useful. And so we got to start early. So we got to look at the front end and the back end and bring those together.
Great point. Because everybody wants about re-entry. So
right.
Let's talk about pre-entry.
Yes.
Like, where can we divert people? I just thought about that. Yeah. So
pre-entry is brilliant. I'm going to use that too.
So like we where are situations where we don't put them in jail to begin with, and we put them in, drug court. It's a long conversation. I can talk about drug court, but mental health courts, veterans courts, other programs, diversion programs. And we start thinking, and then if we start thinking about prenatal care as a criminal justice issue, early childhood education, access, to mental health care, all of this is on this continuum. These are all public safety issues.
That's right.
People aren't wrong, I don't think, Donna and Kimberly, that it's a problem for people to say, I want to be safe. I want to be safe in my house.
I want to be safe.
I want to be safe, right? I mean,
right.
So when we say that, right, and I don't blame anybody who says I don't feel safe and I'm scared and I don't like feeling that way. That's terrible. It breaks my heart to think of people, who go to bed at night scared that they're not going to be safe or somebody might hurt them. I get that. It's okay. I think the conversation is, all right, it seems like there's a lot of us who are scared. Is what we're doing making you less scared? Are there things we could do? Are there other things we might do that make us feel more safe?
Right.
We're seeing a lot of gun violence right now. We're seeing some increases in gun violence. I hate to say it, right? But there's some things happening.
No, it's absolutely true.
So what can we do? And they're seeing across the country. I was talking with a Marshall Project person the other day in North Carolina. I was talking about stuff they're seeing in North Carolina, across the country. And so what are some things we could think about that are interesting and innovative and I know in Mississippi we tend to follow what other people do. That's kind of our practice. But could we imagine a situation where we are doing something that we've thought up on our very own that makes us safer and helps people not fall into the cycle? And that's my hope. And I know it's kind of altruistic, but I'm hopeful. I'm not going to give up on that idea.
Well, go ahead, Kimberly.
I struggle with, we talk about education, we talk about pre-K, we talk about all the things that curtail incarceration rates. Those are also all the things that draw industry. But I can't figure out why we've decided, like every way you come at that, it's a problem. Like fixing our educational system is a problem. And it seems like you should want to draw some industry. What is it about that? So it's that I think we still have to, one of the things we have to get past is the otherism. Because if you fix the education, that means those other people are going to get a good education and they do not deserve, which is why we started this conversation. And so I think that is the crux of some of this, because drawing more industry and making Mississippi a richer state does not seem to be, and stop hemorrhaging our young people. Like there's going to be a tipping point where somebody's going to care that the young people are walking out of the state, walking out of universities and high schools and never coming back. I don't know what that tipping point is, but if that doesn't change people, I wonder, I struggle with understanding if not incarcerating or people will, that idea is interesting.
Yeah. I agree. You're right.
Well, you're supposed to have an answer, Cliff.
I think you can. I mean, the reality is we're either going to take this stuff seriously and we're going to start demanding thoughtful responses, or we're gonna do what we've always done and say the thing that's caused more trouble in Mississippi than anything else, and that is to rely on that's the way we've always done it, and nothing's gotten us in more trouble in Mississippi than the way we've always done it.
That's right. And and I'll often put this hopeful thing into these conversations, whatever they are. But the truth is, with our criminal justice work at the Jackson Free Press before, and all these, and this kind of evidence-based work, and then now what we're doing at the Mississippi Free Press, what I can say is that I have seen a good number of people just change their minds when they get more information, and the kinds of conversation, what you're talking about here, because they don't get the information very often, and they don't know the history, and they don't know the really racist history of our criminal justice laws and our, and so much of this. And so, so I do think that's not the only answer, but it's certainly a very important answer to keep having these conversations, and encourage people and to talk about it. I mean, what I would say to people listening is go talk about the pretrial thing with a group of people in the next week. What does that feel like to keep people in prison for years? I mean, in jail, not prison. That's different. Keep people in jail for months or years without a trial. And what if that was your family? Feel the empathy of that. And so, and I think that alone is information, right? So, well, this went really fast, and I knew it was going to. Yeah, look at that. Look at that. I mean, that's insane. And folks, again, they haven't gone to trial. I know that's what pre-trial.
They are convicted of nothing.
They are not convicted. And so, if you believe in this whole innocent until proven guilty thing, this graphic is a real problem, folks. And so just think about these things and the impacts in which you've said so well tonight, Cliff. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's been great. It did go fast. Really appreciate what you guys are doing. Nothing we do is impact without what you do. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And we so appreciate the work that you do. We'll love to have you back at another point, because we keep having our criminal justice conversations. And as we kind of increase that reporting going forward and do more things. So it's so important. It's so connected to everything. So thank you so much.
Anytime.
We really appreciate it.
Anytime.
And one of the things I wanted to mention to everybody who watches this between now and the 22nd, is that we're doing one of our solution circles, which is virtual, on the media itself. And we're inviting people to come into this conversation. The Mississippi Free Press and the Jackson Advocate are collaborating. Mississippi Humanities Council and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation are supporting this. It will be more than one circle, but the first one is on Tuesday night. It'll be 6 to about 7:30. You can go to mfp.ms/circles to sign up to join us. We're calling for Mississippians and expats because we really want to hear what you think about the media and what it could do to help our state, but people from around the state. So please join us for this conversation. It's your chance to really be heard by people in the media as we get out what you guys have to say. So please join us for this solution circle, very special one, and we really appreciate the support on it. And then the other thing I have to say here is we are in our spring Truth to Power giving campaign. And so if you can throw a couple of dollars or a bunch of dollars into our tip jars, we call it, at mfp.ms/donate, we'd love it. We are actually, Angie Thomas has, as you can see here, has pledged a match, and we're getting close to reaching her match. And I think somehow the last I heard, we're approaching $90,000 of our $100,000 for our spring campaign. And so we really want to make that $100,000 by July 1st, because we are nonprofit media. And right, the more money we can raise, the more journalism we can do. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And we will have another MFP Live show next Thursday night. Not going to tell you the guest yet because we're still working on confirmation, but you guys check us out on YouTube and here on Facebook, if depending on where you're watching it, and podcast coming soon. I think that's all I got. So see you guys soon. And thank you again, Cliff. And thank you, Kimberly, for being a great co-host as always. See y'all soon.
Thank y'all.